Turner, Head of Programming and Outreach for the Georgetown County Library System. Welcome to Digibridge 2.0, and we're thrilled to have y'all here. We are out at our wonderful Carver's Bay Library on Choppy Road in Hemingway, South Carolina, and we'll be here after this week for 2 more Wednesdays at 2 p.m. For a couple more great presentations. So we're looking forward to that. And then we'll have 4 presentations at our Andrews Library on North Morgan Avenue in Andrews, South Carolina, throughout the month of May. And before that, we were at our Southern Georgetown Library, and we had 4 great presentations there. And all of these presentations will be available afterwards online for viewing on our Georgetown County Library YouTube page. So the Digibridge 2.0 series is supported with a growth grant from South Carolina Humanities with funding provided by the National Endowment for the Humanities. South Carolina Humanities is a not-for-profit organization inspiring, engaging, and enriching South Carolinians with programs on literature, history, culture, and heritage. And we're thrilled to be back here, as I said, at our Carver's Bay branch. We want to say thank you again to Marilyn Lance Robb, our wonderful librarian out here, branch manager, and her staff for hosting us. And we're thrilled to host Natalie Daise, performance artist and community educator, storyteller, singer, actor, community builder, generally speaking, a creative force for good all across Georgetown County and well beyond. Along with her husband, Ron, who of course we saw last week, and he did a wonderful job, wonderful talk, with some singing as well here for us. Last week, Natalie starred in the award-winning Nick Jr. series on television, Gullah Island, for which they both served as cultural consultants. They also received the South Carolina Order of the Palmetto, the state's highest honor, as well as the State of South Carolina Folk Heritage Award. So we are thrilled to host here with us today for Digibridge 2.0, Natalie Daise. So please welcome.
And listen to the whole introduction, it makes me sound so very accomplished. But ultimately, I'm a storyteller. I've always been a storyteller. And I think about how I started. It was probably just a child. You know, you sit up under the grown-ups in the house. I grew up, and my great-grandma lived with us. My grandma was often there, my mama and my daddy. And I learned very early that if I just sat quiet while the grown-ups were talking, I could hear all the stuff. And if I was stupid enough to say, "What you talking about?" they would be this grown folk business. And they would run me off. So I think I learned, the voices that I hear, like if ever you hear me tell a story and there's an older woman in it, it's probably one of my grandmas. I absorbed that. And when folks say, how do you become a storyteller? I say it starts with listening. Listen to the folk around you, pay attention to your environment. That's where it starts. That's where it started for me. I don't think I was called, the first time I was called a storyteller, I was a little girl, and we were very churched. We were highly churched. And one of the things you were not going to do is dance. Sinful moving around, all that kind of stuff wasn't going to happen. And somehow I learned to do the twist. I do not know how. But somehow I learned to do the twist. And once I had developed that particular sin, I wanted to teach other children how to sin in the same way. And so at our little church school run at our church, I was teaching the children how to twist. I was just twisting. Now, there was no music, except for in my head. But there was a crowd of other children eager to be led into sin surrounding me while I was twisting and showing them how to twist. And suddenly, because this was back in the olden days when this could happen, a belt came down from the sky. And it was Mr. Jefferson, the second grade teacher. It was just, because you could whip children at school at that time. And the belt came down, and the children partied like the Red Sea, and it was just me leading all in the center. And of course, this went back home, because you know, everything went back home. And I remember my mother and my grandmother looking at me, and I could have been about, I don't know how I was, 7, I guess, 6 or 7, I started school a little young. And my mother said, "Where did you learn that?" And I thought, and I was trying to save myself, because I said, "The pastor." I was a storyteller. And back then, you know, because if you even said lie in my house, that was a bad word. So I'd be, "Ooh, you story?" So I storied, and I was just trying to save my life. But I didn't actually name myself a storyteller until after I met and married Ron. By then I had stopped storying, I guess, but I was always listening. I was always reading. I was a voracious reader. I remember the day I learned to read. You know, now children learn how to read like in kindergarten, or they're expected to know. That wasn't the expectation. In kindergarten, what I did was I played with finger paint and teachers read to us. That's what happened in kindergarten. I learned to read in first grade, Mrs. Nesbitt, and we learned with phonics. You know, all the letters make different sounds, and you can put those sounds together. And that was the first year that the Dick and Jane books had added black characters. Pete, and they were twins, Pam, Patty, and Pete, I think, Pam and Patty. And I remember sounding it out, and I thought Pete was Patty, because the P-E-T-E, but I remember when I sounded it out and it was a word that made sense, it was like, and I took the book home and I read it to my great grandma, you know, and that was it. I was off. Daddy got me a library card, and I had, that was it. I loved the library. I went to, every 2 weeks, he went to the library, every 2 weeks. You could get 3 books, turn them back in 2 weeks, get 3 more books. And that was what was happening, building that storytelling, I think, in me. And then I met Ron. And Ron was writing his first book called Reminiscences of a Sea Island Heritage, about growing up in the Sea Island community. And I thought it was like wonderful. My grandma was a poet. She would write books and publish them herself. She was a poet and she was a preacher. And she was a singer. She would write songs and she would write poems, and she would always have these self-published books. So I knew that writing was something you could do. But I hadn't done it. Well, I thought I would want to grow up and be a writer. But Ron was actually writing a book like a publisher published it. And after it was published, he would go around and do book readings, and folk would say, "Sing a song from the book," and y'all know he will do that. Tell a story from the book. And then one day, because this is the kind of man that my husband is, he sat down with the book and he turned it all into a script. He just scripted it out. And then he said to me, "Okay, this will be your part, this will be my part, and then when we get to this part, we're gonna sing." And for no reason other than he likes to do that kind of thing. And I had said to him once, "Wouldn't it be cool if we were like Ozzie Davis and Ruby Dee?" Some of y'all know who that is, some of y'all might not. But we had been singing together already. We've been singing inspirational songs and singing at churches around the community. So he did this, and we just was like playing with it at the house, singing and reading in our house, just the 2 of us. When he got a call from the director of the Penn Center Historic System, and said, "I have a museum curators meeting. They're here for the week. I don't have anything to do with them Thursday night. Can you think of something? Can you come and talk to them?" And he's like, "Yeah, I got something." So we went, and we stood there, and we hadn't memorized it. And we just like read, and it was time to sing, we sang. And we finished, they stood up and applauded. And we were like, "Oh, okay." And then they started calling us and writing us. And that's really how it started. And that's when I kind of knew that I was a storyteller. And we would do it on and off. And then in 1987, I quit my job because we were going on the road as storytellers. My daddy was worried. My daddy was concerned. You married first. I was born in New York. I was born in upstate New York. I had come south. No, excuse me. I was sent south, but nobody asked me if I wanted to come. Grandma needed somebody, and she was on Ladies Island in Beaufort County, and another auntie bought a one-way Greyhound bus ticket to Beaufort. And I'm like, one way, y'all trying to get rid of me. And I thought, if the South was so great, why'd y'all leave? And they sent me down to Ladies Island, and I said, I'll stay 2 weeks. And that was, what, 39 years ago.
Wow.
Tomorrow will be 39 years. But, you know, I'd come down and, you know, gotten to know my Southern family, and then met Ron, and then stepped onto stage. But my father was like, okay, so now you married a Baptist. I wasn't raised Baptist, and now you quit your job to tell stories. And it was really a wonderful thing, because it was like stepping into myself. So I've been telling stories a very long time. And when I went back to finish my undergrad, which I did, I was on the 12-year plan. Some folks are on the 4-year plan. I was on the 12-year plan. I didn't finish my bachelor's until after my daughter was born. I was married and had a child. And went back and finished. And the thesis that I wrote for my senior thesis was on the healing power of story, the role story plays in our lives. This week I picked up a book that I had read during my undergrad way back. It's called The Uses of Enchantment by Bruno Bettelheim. And it's about how children need story to develop a sense of themselves and how to move through the world. And we all do. You know, sometimes we think stories are for children, but they're not. We all need story. We're shaped by story, whether it's the Bible stories. I remember me growing up, it was mostly that, you know. Moses, baby Moses in the basket going down the Nile, or Samuel, who God would call him in the night. And that used to scare me to death. I kept being afraid God would call me. And I was like, please don't call me, please don't call me. But these were stories. And then there was a set of books called the Books of Knowledge, and my daddy subscribed to these books of knowledge. They were like little encyclopedia books, and they had you know, science information and history and fairy tales. Now, they would have never bought me fairy tales, but they were in the books of knowledge, and so I would just like consume those. And it was just a wonderful thing. And as I began to learn how story shapes culture, shapes community, helps us know who we are, I realized that I was set very, very early on a very powerful path of being a teller. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to share some stories with you. And some of them are very old, and some of them are not. But the first one is actually an African story. And this is important because as Gullah Geechee people, as African Americans, our roots are in Africa, and almost all the stories in the way, we don't even think about the fact that the stories that shape our lives, many of them have roots that pre-exist our experience. So this story is called The Cowtail Switch. And it was set in a village in Western Africa. Now, in this village, there was a man who was very prominent and well respected. He wasn't a chief, but folk looked up to him. He was probably pretty wealthy. He had a wife and 4 sons. Now, in this village, and it's still the case because my whole family went to Sierra Leone at the beginning of 2020, and we noticed there's still there's a division of labor. There are things that women do, and there are things that men do. And in this village, the men, they did the hunting. There was manly work. I do hunting, I do this, I do that. The women did, you know, we raise the children, we do the gardens, we could do all the cooking, we do all the cleaning, we do all that. So this gentleman said to his wife, it's time to go hunting, and I'm going to take my sons. And she said, oh, don't take our sons this time, because you know I'm expecting another child, and I can't do the heavy work because it's too late in my pregnancy. And he said, well, okay, I'll leave the sons here, and I'll go myself. So he left his sons, and he got his weapons, and he got his supplies. He went off across the field and into the woods, and they watched him go. And then sons helped their mother. You know, they did the digging, and they did the chopping, and they did the lifting, and anything that she couldn't do because she was just too pregnant to handle it. And at the end of the day, they gathered around the outdoor kitchen. And as they gathered to eat, one of the sons said, Father isn't back yet. And the other said, oh, you're right. And then they ate their meal, and they went to bed. Well, they got up the next day, and they did all the things that Mama needed to do, chop, lift, tote, whatever. And at the end of the day, another son said, oh, Father isn't back yet. And the other said, oh, you're right, he's not. And this went on for the next day, the next, until finally no one even said, Father isn't back yet. And the time came that the woman gave birth, and it was another son. And the baby did what babies do. It cried, it learned to crawl, learned to pull itself up and toddle around, and eventually it learned to speak. And the first thing the baby said was, "Where's my father?" And his brother said, "Oh, that's right. Father isn't back yet. Well, maybe we should go look for him." What do you think? So, the brothers got their weapons, and they got some supplies, and they got some things. They went off across the field, and they entered the woods where they'd seen their father go. And they followed the trail until they lost it. They were lost there in the woods, and they weren't sure what to do, when the older brother said, "Well, you know that I have some special powers." And the other said, "Well, of course you do, we all do." And he said, "Well, one of my powers is that I'm able to pick up the faintest scent on the wind. I think I can find our father's trail." And his other brother said, "Well, you can. Well, you should do it then." And so the older brother, he just, until he picked up his father's trail, and they began to bushwhack their way through the woods. And whenever they would get lost, they would stop, and he would, and they'd pick up the trail, and they'd bushwhack their way through until finally they came to a clearing. And in the clearing, they found their father's rusted weapons and some scattered bones. And they said, "Oh no, we're too late. Something has killed Father." And they stood there just in sorrow around these scattered bones until the second son said, "Well, guys, you know I've got some special powers." And they said, yes, we know, we all do." And he said, "Well, I actually am able to knit bones together again." And they said, "You can? Well, you should do it then." So the second son, he stood over the scattered bones and he began to speak. And as he spoke, the bones began to come together. The skull attaching to the jaw, click. The spinal column, click. The arms, click, down to the hips, legs, all the way to the toes, until a skeleton lay in the field. But it was just their skeleton. And as they stood there looking sadly at their father's skeleton, the third son said, "So guys, you know I've got some special powers." So they said, yeah, we all do." He said, "Well, I'm actually able to wrap skeletons with skin and muscle." And they said, "You can? Well, you should do it then." So he stood over his father's body. They began to speak, and as they began to speak, you could see the red muscle wrapping around the body, and finally the skin, till the father's body lay there in the clearing. But it was just his body. And then the fourth son said, "So guys, you know I have some special powers." It's like, yeah, we all do. And he said, "Well, see, I know how to blow life into a body." And they said, "Well, you should do it then." So he stood over his father and he took in a deep breath and he blew. And his father said, and opened his eyes and sat up. And he looked around and he said, "You came for me." And he jumped up, and they were greeting each other, and they hugged each other, and they wrapped him in clothing, and they gathered his things, and they went back the way they came, which was very easy because they had bushwhacked the trail. And they came out of the woods into the edge of the field. Now it was the end of the day, and the folk in the village were gathering for their evening meals, and they looked and they saw that there were 5 men coming out of the woods. And they said, they must have found their father. Someone ran to get his wife, and they all began running to greet them, and they met, and there was all kind of celebration, and his wife came running, holding their youngest child, and they were so happy to get together. And finally the man raised his arm, and he said, "I have to say something." And everyone was silent because, one, he was deeply respected, and he'd been gone. And he said, "I am so glad to be back. I want to have a celebration. I want to have a big celebration. Wife, I want you to kill the fattest cow we have, so that at the end of this period, we can have a big celebration, and all I want you to do is to bring me the cow's tail." And so they slaughtered the fattest cow and brought in the tail. And he cleaned the tail, and he cured the tail, and he wrapped it with gold and with silver and with beads, and it was the most beautiful cow tail switch you'd ever seen, the kind only carried by someone important. And everywhere he went, he would carry that cow tail switch, and everyone would go, "Ooh, look at that." And finally, the time came for the celebration. And there was dancing, and there was singing, and there's all kind of food. There was jollof rice, and there was callaloo, and there was sesame this, and there was just food everywhere. And they were just stuffing themselves, and there was palm wine. And finally, as the celebration had been going on into the night, he raised his cowtail switch and everyone was quiet. And he said, I must speak. I was gone and now I've returned. And I want to give this switch to the son who did the most to bring me back. At which point the first one said, that would be me. That would be me. Nobody even knew where you were. I found you, but you were just in the woods. But the second son said, no, that would be me, because when we found you, you were just bones. I put you together. Bones, I put the skeleton together. But the third son said, well, I wrapped him with muscle and skin, so that would be me. And the fourth one said, what are you without breath? It would be me. And they started to fight. They're just fussing back and forth, such noise and such fussing. And finally he raised his switch and they were silent. He said, I've made a decision. And he gave the switch to which son? The baby. The baby. Because he said, one is never truly gone until one is forgotten. End of story. I love that story. And I tell it a lot now because it's about the importance of memory. It's about the importance of what has been passed down and the things that we do not forget. Recently, and I was talking to Dan about it, I had a box that you brought me today of slides. These were slides that my daddy had been taking in his big brown camera for many years, from well before I was born. Some of these go back to the Korean War. And once upon a time, what would happen, folk would get together, he would pull out the projector, and there'd be a slideshow. But that stopped long ago. But before he died, he gave the box to a cousin who sat on it for several years. Then I got it, sat on it for several years, and then Julie at the library said, I can scan those for you. And I was like, and I began to look at these old pictures, some I had never seen before. And it's like I'm bringing back to life folk who are gone. We have to remember. And sometimes the things, even our practices, the kind of foods we cook, are the things we do, are things that have been passed down, and we don't even know that we're keeping alive somebody who had come before us, maybe all the way back to the western coast or whatever coast of Africa. That we have passed these things down in lore, in habit, in the kitchen, how you wash, I wash my rice. How you wash your rice or don't wash your rice. I cook greens the way my daddy taught me how to cook greens. My daughter cooks greens the way I taught her how to cook greens. I do cornbread in the cast iron skillet that my great grandmother had. I got Sarah Jackson's cast iron skillet in my kitchen right now. She died in 1974 at 100 years old. I got her cast iron skillet. And my daughter's eyeing it. Don't you touch that, I'll give it to you when I'm ready. But there are others, because I also got my daddy's mama's cast iron skillet. I am, in my family, I have been the caretaker. I took care of my great-grandmother in the year before she died. I was 14. I took care of my daddy's mama. That's what brought me down here. I took care of my mother's mama. And she lived with me until she was 96, and then she decided to go to Florida to stay with my brother because he ran a nursing home and she was going to move in there. And I have been taking care of my father came down to be with me until he died, and my mother lived with me until January when she moved into a nursing home. And she has dementia, and she doesn't know who I am, but she thinks I'm a very nice lady, which I appreciate. You're a very nice lady. So I have been the caretaker, not just of the people, but of the stories and the things. And they become like precious things to me. We cook, my husband bakes cakes. If y'all ain't never had one of my husband's cakes, you need to. Ooh, it's good. It's good. He still has the bowls his mama used when he was little. And she was 102 when she passed. He still has them. But also he has her recipe. He is making mama's cakes and shipping them out all over the country. Some weeks my whole house just smells like cake. And this can be so hard. But because he's not baking them for us. My son comes home and he's like, so we can't have any of this? No. But the power of memory, the power of passing on these things. So I'm going to share, look at the clock, I'm good, we've got plenty of time. A story, this is another African story. And this is an Anansi story. Now Anansi is a trickster. And there are trickster stories in many cultures. One of the tricksters that we know of in African American folklore is Rabbit, Brer Rabbit, or Brother Rabbit. But I was listening to someone say, well, once upon a time the rabbit was a spider. And in West African tales, it is Anansi, the spider. So I always have fun with this story, and I'd like to tell it to children as well as adults, because basically we're all children. I am every age I've ever been, and when people talk about your inner child, I'll be like, my child's right out here. It is not hidden deep inside. My child be hanging out all the time, which is, why not? So this story is about Anansi the spider, which you know spiders have 8 legs. And we normally think that spiders have 8 skinny, thin legs, wobbly legs. This is not always true. It was not always true. As a matter of fact, Anansi had 8 big, thick, strong legs. And when Anansi walked through the village, you heard him coming. Now, another thing about Anansi was that Anansi had the big eye. Anansi was greedy. Anansi liked to eat his food, and he liked to eat your food. And he would like to make sure that you give it to him. Well, one day Anansi was walking through the village on his way to the river, and we don't know why he was going to the river, but he was on his way, and as he was going, he smelled something, and it smelled like jollof rice. But jollof rice, it's red rice. It's red rice, but they call it jollof rice. We call it the same thing. Came here in the memory of the ancestors. And he smelled the jollof rice, and he said, that smells like jollof rice, and it seems like it's coming from Monkey's house. And so Anansi walked over to Monkey's house and he knocked on the door. Monkey peeked out his head. He said, hi there, Anansi. Anansi said, well, hi there, Monkey. Do I smell jollof rice? And Monkey said, well, yes, Anansi, you do smell jollof rice. And Anansi said, well, can I have some, please? And Monkey said, well, you know how long it takes to simmer the jollof rice to get all the seasonings in, so it's not ready yet, but if you like, you can come in and wait. And Anansi said, no, I don't have time, I'm going to the river. But tell you what, why don't I spin a web? And we could tie one end of that web to that pot of jollof rice. And keep the other one tied to my arm, and then when it's ready, you just give that web a tug and I'll come running. And Monkey said, okay, and so Anansi spun that web and attached it to the pot of jollof rice, and off he went, going to the river. But, that smells like Callaloo. Well, Callaloo, greens. Y'all eat greens. Y'all eat greens all the time. Callaloo, they call it Callaloo in some parts of the world, and they call them just greens here, but it was the same thing, cooked the same way. And it smells like that Callaloo is coming from Antelope's house. And he walked up to Antelope's house, he knocked on the door. Antelope said, well, hello, Anansi. Anansi said, well, hello there, Antelope. Do I smell Callaloo? And Antelope said, well, yes, Anansi, you do. And Anansi said, well, can I have some, please? And Antelope said, well, it's not ready yet, because, greens can take a little while. He said, well, you can come in and you can wait. And Anansi said, no, I'm on my way to the river, but tell you what, why don't I spin a web, attach one end to that pot of Callaloo, keep the other one attached to my wrist, and then when the Callaloo is ready, you just give it a tug, and I'll come running. And so Antelope agreed, and off Anansi went. And he hadn't gone far when I think I smell yams with honey. Sweet potato yams, sweet the same kind of thing, cook it the same kind of way. Come here in the memory of the ancestors, and they just passed it up. And he said, that smells like it's coming from Gorilla's house. And he went up to Gorilla's house and knocked on the door. Gorilla looked out. Well, hello, Anansi. Hi there, Gorilla. Do I smell yams with honey? Gorilla says, yes, Anansi, I am indeed cooking yams with honey. Anansi said, oh, can I have some, please? He said, it is not ready, but would you like to come in and wait? The children are here, they love it when you tell them stories, you can sit with the children. He said, no, I'm going to the river, but tell you what, I'll spin a web, attach it to that pan of yams, and then, when it's ready, you can just give it a tug and I'll come running. And Gorilla agreed. And off Anansi went. thinking about all the food he was gonna yam up at the end of the day. And he was getting almost to the river thinking, it's gonna be good, when he felt a tug. So, ooh, that jollof rice must be ready. And then he felt another tug, ooh, that callaloo must be ready. Then he felt another tug, ooh, those yams must be ready. And then, he had made several other stops before he got to the river. And he felt another tug, and another tug, and another tug. And soon he was being tugged in every kind of direction. He didn't know what to do. He was struggling against it. He struggled toward the river until finally he fell in. And the water washed the webs away. And he lay there for a while. And then he stood up. But when he stood up, he felt kind of ungainly and wobbly. And when he looked down, his 8 big, strong legs had become 8 thin, skinny legs. And by the time he had wobbled back through the village, everybody had yam up their own food. And the only thing he had to eat was the food that his wife had prepared for him in the first place, which should have been enough. And the moral of the story is, that's what happens when you got the big eye in the story. I love the story of, one, it's just fun, and two, about when you start talking about how food becomes a part of a culture, how food that was African food became American food. Folks say, well, let's go get some Southern food. Let's go get some Gullah food. It's like, well, you're actually saying, let's go get some African foods. When we were in Sierra Leone, we went to a rice feast one night. Honestly, I have never seen this many kinds of rice. There was red rice or jollof rice, yes. There was coconut rice, and there was shrimp rice, and there was chicken rice, and there was rice and greens. 2 or 3 different types of rice and greens. And there was rice with palm nut oil, and there was just, and because I was polite and raised to be polite, I did get some of each of them because it would have been rude not to. And to see that this is where its origins are. And in Sierra Leone, we walked by fields of rice that folk were still growing. Now, Georgetown County was the center of rice production in this country. And they brought over West African rice farmers to do this. Very specifically, we need to grow rice. We don't know how to grow rice. They've been growing rice for centuries. We will bring over rice farmers. But in some parts of Sierra Leone, they're growing rice the way I went and put out my seeds this spring. This is not industry rice. This is village rice. This is the rice field that we're going to harvest in this village for our rice. And it was beautiful. It was growing, it was golden, and it was beautiful. And we were driving up the road, the dirt road, and these guys were out there harvesting rice, and we stopped, and I got a big sheath of rice. Beautiful rice. And I'm an artist, I'm a visual artist too, and sometimes I will use rice in my work. And I was like, I'm bringing this back to the States. And then I got the customs in Atlanta, and they took my rice. Oh, no. Like, what you think they're gonna do? I wanna know what they did with it. Eat it. It was this beautiful sheep, and it was still like sheep, so I'm thinking, they probably won't even know what it is. And I should have just said it's grass, because it is a form of a grass, it is. But I didn't want a story. So I was like, it's rice. And they're, oh, well, we are taking this. And I was like, so sad. And you know what? They would not have stopped me. But, okay, I grew up in upstate New York. And, I just look like your average African-American girl, I guess. But Ron looks very West African. So we're coming through, and my son and I are ahead of him with our stuff. We walk ahead, and they don't stop us, but they look at him. And they think he's African coming into the country. And I noticed everybody they're pulling is someone who looks like they're African or not American. That's everybody they're pulling to see what they're bringing in. And so if we had acted like we didn't know him, we could have kept going. But we said, oh, they called you? And they said, oh, you too. And next time, man, I'm going to walk ahead of you and I'm going to act like I don't know you. I just look like your average American girl, but you up here looking all Sierra Leonean, which is what his DNA has said his heritage is, that his maternal heritage is Sierra Leonean and his paternal heritage is Ghanaian. My paternal heritage ultimately is Guinea-Bissau, but I have a lot of other stuff up in here that made me get through customs fine before.
Except when you bring in rice.
Right, except for when I'm bringing rice. Next time I know how to do it. But yeah, I love that story because it not only talks about food, it also talks about tricksters. And I'm looking at my, oh, I'm good though, I'm good, right? Okay, I'm good till 3, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, excellent. Okay, so I'm gonna do an African-American trickster story next, just because it's fun. So this is Rabbit. When the Africans got to this country, still telling trickster tales, sometimes, like I said, the spider might have become a rabbit. In many indigenous cultures, in American indigenous cultures, trickster is a coyote. But in many African American cultures, he is rabbit. And much like Anansi, he's tricky, he's sneaky, he tries to get over. It works sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes these stories are known as pourquoi or how come stories. This is how come this thing has happened, or this is how come this thing is like that. So the story about Anansi was also like a pourquoi story, a how come. And that's why spiders have skinny legs, etc. So this story is about Rabbit and Gator. So one day, Rabbit's standing on the bank of the river and he's talking to Gator. Just having a chat. And he said, "Oh, how you doing, Gator?" Gator says, "I'm doing all right. How you doing?" And Rabbit said, "Well, I'm okay, but you know, sometimes you just sure do see a lot of trouble on land." And Gator said, "Trouble? Who's that? I don't even know what trouble is. I never see any trouble. I don't even know what it is." And Rabbit said, "Oh, you don't?" I tell you what, Gator, I like you. I wouldn't do this for just anybody. But because I like you, if you come with me tomorrow morning, I will personally myself introduce you to trouble. And Gator said, "You will? Well, can I bring the family?" And Gator said, Rabbit said, "Oh yeah, bring everybody." So Gator was excited, and he went back down to his den in the water in the bank of the river, and he found his family. He said, "Tomorrow, y'all, we're going on a field trip. Rabbit's going to introduce us to trouble." Little kid said, "Who's trouble?" He said, "I don't know, we're going to meet it tomorrow." So they went to bed really early, so they could get up really early, because it took the Gators a long time to get ready to do anything. And the reason it took them so long was because they were all vain. They're very proud of themselves. You see, Gators were as smooth and shiny as a pair of Easter shoes, from the tips of their nose to the tips of their tails. And you couldn't tell them nothing because they all knew they were fine. Whenever Gator would catch a glimpse of his reflection in the water or a mirror, he would go, "I'll show him good looking." And so all of them were like that. So they would be tussling over who was in front of them, had the reflection longest, who had smoothed their beautiful alligator skin. And finally, they got themselves up on land. And they began to walk and look for Rabbit. They were just walking. Didn't see Rabbit. No Rabbit. And they were getting tired of walking and looking for Rabbit. Now, Gators can go quite a bit of time on land, but you know, it was getting hot. And they were getting tired. And they'd been looking for Rabbit for a while and they hadn't found him. So finally, Brother Gator saw a field of dry straw. And he said, "You know, why don't we go in there and get a little respite and rest, and then we can go on and find Rabbit so he can introduce us to trouble." And so the whole family of Gators went to the field of straw. Now, Rabbit had been very close by. He had been watching those Gators from the second they left the water. And when he saw the entire family of Gators go in the field of straw, he said, "Guess it's about time to be trouble." So he took his pipe out of his mouth. And he knocked some hot coals to the edge of that field. Now the Gators, they started to smell something. What you think that is? Well, that must be trouble, but he sure does smell funny. Then they heard a noise they had never heard before. It was like a crackle, snap, crackle, sizzle. And they said, "That must be trouble. He sure does sound funny." So they looked in the direction of the noise. And they saw something they'd never seen before. It was gray and soft and fluffy. Oh, and then it would turn orange and yellow and red. And they said, "Ooh, trouble sure is good looking." So they lay real still because they wanted trouble to come close enough for them to get a good look. And as they waited, trouble came closer and closer until, ouch! It bit me! Brother Gator said, "Run, children, this trouble's a mean creature." The little Gators just turned tail and ran. Mama Gator brother just running for the water with trouble behind him, just biting them all the way. When they hit the water, a cloud of steam went up. Now Rabbit sat on the bank of the river laughing his head off. Said he hadn't had that much fun in but 2-3 days tops. But the Gators did not think it was funny. As a matter of fact, it was 3 days before they even showed their eyes above water again. And when they did, they were as gray and cracked and ugly as they are now. And that's why Gators look. So, a how come story, a fun story, and interesting, almost always in trickster stories. And trickster stories are generally told by people who are oppressed. Almost always the small animal manages to overcome the animal who you think should win or be in charge. Almost always the wisdom and the tricks are given to the small animal, the rabbit, the spider, who by their wits overcome, unless they get in trouble like a Nazi. I'm going to share a modern story and then we can talk a little bit about them. So folktales. Folktales have been around as long as there have been folk. They are the stories we tell. There's always an origin of some kind to these folk tales, but we always are creating them and we don't think about that. But in your families, I swear you must have folk tales. Tales you tell about, remember Aunt Sue? You know? I go into a school and say, y'all know, you'll see like, remember when, Billy threw up in the classroom? And that will follow Billy until he's 90.
Oh, yeah.
And you tell it over and over, and it becomes a tale. It becomes a part of the folklore of your particular family or your particular community, small community or large. And so we are always, because we are storytellers, telling stories. So this story is one I learned that first year that I was in South Carolina. I met Ron that May. He asked me to marry him that November because he works quick like that. I dragged it out for 2 years. And he said, look, we can do this or not. I was like, okay. So, but the very first year, that November, he asked me to marry him, and then that December, his family began to come home, where they were scattered around the country. His mama still lived in a community known as Cedar Grove. And just like in this community, many communities are known by names of old plantations, even if there's no sign, you know where it is. And he was from Cedar Grove. There's no sign that says Cedar Grove, but everybody knows who Cedar Grove is. So I went out to his mama's house, and Ron is the baby of 9, 5 sisters. So you know how I was feeling about this little girlfriend meeting 5 sisters. So I was there, and I was my little shy self. And what I do when I'm nervous, I always travel with a book. He says, please stop bringing a book everywhere. But it'd be just like I could read my book. And I was knitting. So he brings home the weird girlfriend who's bring her knitting in the book to the Christmas meal because I didn't know what to do. And so all his siblings are beginning to gather and laugh and talk, and they're playing cards, and they're drinking beer, and they're eating. His sister Vera, she came down from Baltimore, and I swear this is true, none of this is made up. She opened a big bag, she took out a bottle of Maalox and another one of Pepto-Bismol and said, okay, let's eat. And so this was the gathering, and I was just sitting there real quiet, really overwhelmed. And then one of them said, remember when Peachy burned down the house? And then they all laughed. I was like, that sounds funny to me. But eventually, spending time with his family, I would hear about this story. And then I was like, oh, this is a great story, so I'm going to tell it. Now, y'all know a story, so it might be a little different than I learned it. But most of it is true. So Peachy was a great aunt. And this is true. She was a great aunt. And she lived in a community known as Coffin Point. So Ron's people, his daddy's people came from Coffin Point. Which is another community that, I think they actually might have a sign up there now. But so Peachy lived in Coffin Point, and she was a very hard-working woman. She worked the crops. She worked whatever was seasonal. Like if it was shrimp season, she was down to she had shrimp. If it was crab season, she picked crab. If it was tomato season, she picked tomatoes. Whatever. That's what Peachy did. And after a while, these years of this kind of labor, her hands were big and hard, and she was tired. Now, she had 2 children, Pot of Gold and Awana. Pot of Gold and Awana were big enough and old enough to work, but they didn't like to work much. Whenever Peachy would say to her son, Pop, why don't you come down to the dock with me today? Pop would say, okay, Ma, ooh, remember that time I hurt my back? Oh, there you go. And she said to her daughter, Juana, you gonna come to the fields with me today? Juana said, well, I think so, no, I don't think so, no. And so Peachy would go, and she'd work all day from day clean till the sun be red for down, and then go home and take care of those most grown children. Well, this happened during tomato season. I don't know if any of you ever picked tomatoes for money. Yeah, no? Me. It's just me. It is hard work. When I first came down to South Carolina and I was having money, my cousin said, oh, I know, we make good money picking tomatoes. They was lying. So I went to the field with them. This is what I know about picking tomatoes. You know, you pick them while they are green. They're bright green, like the plants themselves. Also, so are the snakes and the bugs. They're all green. And you get paid by weight, not time. So you pick, bag. You can tell the folk who've been doing it for a while because they don't even stand all the way up. Snap, 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 bag, snap, 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 bag, snap, 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 bag. Put the bag down, pick up another bag. And after a while, what begins to happen is that when you snap that green tomato off, there's a little bit of white sap right there. And it starts to coat your hands. And it will harden. It'll be like shellac. And I noticed the only way to get rid of it is to crush a green tomato and you can dissolve, scrub it off. And so that's what I saw folk doing, and that's what I started doing. And I made my first full day, and I mean a full day in the fields. I made $8.40 because I was not fast. I was not fast. But it's hard work, and this was what Peachy was doing that day. She'd been out in the fields all day picking tomatoes, and at the end of the day, she was sticky and muddy up to her knees. And when she went back to her little house in Coffin Point, she walked in, she was tired, and they were her children, Pot of Gold and Water, just sitting at the table playing Tom, card game. Just, oh, Mama, you so glad you're back, because I'm hungry. Oh, Mama, the Montgomery Ward catalog is here. I saw a sweater on more. Peachy looked at the children. She said, okay, wait. So she turned to the stove, and she still had a wood-burning stove, and it was cold, and she looked, and there was no wood in the wood box, and she said, well, one of y'all go and get me some wood. And Pot said, okay, no, I don't think I can go cut any wood. And she looked at Awana, and Awana said, getting dark out there, I ain't going out there. And Peachy, she looked at those children, and she looked at that cold stove. And she looked at the children, and she made a decision. She went over and she got an old straight back chair. She pulled it up in front of the cold stove and she sat down in it. And she decided she was not going to move until she got warm, and she didn't care how it happened. So she just sat there in that old green straight back chair, and she started to rock herself. She started to rock herself back and forth and hum. Now, Pot of Gold and Awana had never seen their mama act like this before. They said, Mama, you okay? Don't say a word. Just sat there rocking and humming. Now, Pot of Gold and Awana started to get scared, and after a while they didn't know what to do. Awana said, come outside, Pot. So they went out on the porch. Pot said, you think Mama finally gone cracky? He said, I don't know. What we gonna do? You gonna go get some wood? Awana looked over to the woods, and it was full dark now. She said, no, I ain't going in there. It could be a haunt or plat. I something in there. I ain't going in there. And she said to him, are you gonna get some wood? He said, I ain't going in there. What we gonna do? And then I want to look down, and they always meant to hammer down that loose top step. Just never got to it. So she reached down and she pulled it up. They went in the house, they took it in the stove, and started a fire. As soon as it started getting good and hot, and Peachy reached out her hands, and when it got hot, she stood up. She made a pot of rice, did a pan of cornbread, fried some fish. Everything was just like it was supposed to be. The children relaxed. But as the fire died down, so did Peachy. Until by the time it was out, she was sitting in her chair, rocking and humming. Now this went on for some time with Peachy rocking and humming, or humming and rocking, until Pot of Gold and Awana got hungry enough, scared enough, or all of the above to go get another piece of wood. Soon the steps were gone. And in the porch, And they started on the house. Piece of the windowsill, piece of the door frame, piece of the wall, piece of the floor.
Wow.
Until one day, if you just happened by, you would see Peachy and her children just sitting in the empty field. Now, yeah, this would seem strange to you if you just happened on it. But Peachy and her children had been burning down their own house bit by bit and piece by piece for so long, the neighbors hadn't even noticed. Now, the first time I told this story, I was at a storytelling festival, and the guy came up to me and he said, "Is there a moral to the story?" I said, "What you mean, is there a moral to the story?" He said, "No, you gotta come up with a moral." And so I thought about it. And this is the moral that I came up with. You might think it's peachy to wait on a pot of gold if you wanna, but you'll end up out in the cold. So now, a lot of that story is true, for real. For true. He really did. He had a great aunt Peachy. They really did burn down their house. Her children were not Pot of Gold and Iwana, but those are family names. He got a cousin who's Pot of Gold, and he also had another cousin named Iwana. And so I just named her children that for the story. They really did mostly destroy their house. And folk were like, what are they gonna do? But she had a sister who was in service, who, not in the service, but she took care of people. And she had moved up to Baltimore, and she had been saving up money for a long time for her funeral, because she wanted them funerals from, there was a movie called Imitation of Life. She wanted one of those funerals, and she had been saving up a lot of money. And when she heard that Peachy, who was her sister, she sent down some money, and they got herself a double wide, which was actually better than her house. So that was the end of the story. So, I would say, in your families, what are the stories that you're telling? And ask, now this must sound some things that old people say, but really it's not just because I'm old. One of the sad things about constant streaming is that we do not hear the stories that people tell, because we're busy just watching other people's stories like this. And we aren't listening to stories that are there all around you. They're there. But we aren't aware of the absolute value of the stories in our families, in our communities, in our churches, in our schools. These stories are important. They carry they're more than just facts. They're cues about community, about how to live, about what we had with us, what we can send forward. And so in my house, we always told stories. Now we do a lot of streaming too, particularly during the pandemic, man. I have watched so many murders. Because if you think about what's on that you watch, basically, how many shows are about murder? A lot of them.
Yeah.
A lot of them. You just be watching all the crime. It's like, oh my goodness, how many murders have I watched in the last 2 years? But, to ask stories. When my mother moved in with me, she was still, she forgot things that were recent, but I learned more about her childhood in the last year before she began to lose that. Wonderful stories that she, for some reason, never told when I was a kid. Because partly is that I think sometimes I grew up, parents didn't talk to children like that. Or there were things that happened and they were like, well, they don't need to know. Yes, they do. And if you have some stories that you're like, oh, they don't need to know that. Yes, they do. Because it's important to know that your grandma, your mama, your auntie, your brother, that they have been in an experience that you can learn from, to be that real with them. Because that's how we build our communities, and that's what we have to pass on. And until one is forgotten, one is not gone. So those are my stories for today. If you have any questions about anything, I will be so happy to answer. So thank you. Oh, yes. Did you have a question?
Oh, no.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you, y'all.
Oh, you're welcome.
Anybody have any questions before we let the Miss Daise, Ron's, I don't like to say better half, but the other half, because they're both wonderful. I mean, a wonderful job here Yeah, a lot full of stories and vividly told. So thank you so much. Would anyone like to ask a question? Put her on the spot here.
Yeah, I'm never on the spot.
Yeah, she does pretty well on the spot. I think she can improvise well.
I'm a storyteller.
Yeah, you story. You
I
story a
story.
lot. And do you think?
I got a question.
Yes.
Yeah.
What do you like most about what you do?
Oh, you know what I love? I love what happens when you see that the people who are listening go, oh yeah, I got that, or me too. Because you can tell when that starts to happen and folk like, yeah. That, I love it. I love it when, you say, well, if you ever picked a paper, somebody like, yeah, I've been out there and I do that. The thing is that stories create community. If you can have folk in a room from all kind of different places, and you tell a story, and in that story is something that there's a sense of familiarity that reminds them of their grandmother, or there's something, and you start forming community. And like, that's magic stuff to me. That is absolutely magic stuff. The hardest part about the pandemic is I did my storytelling on Zoom. And it's the community, because the storyteller is not just up here doing like all the work. That's not what's happening. You guys are a part of this. We've created a sort of a loop, a community. So I feel you, and I'm sharing with you. Sometimes I'm booked to go somewhere, and sometimes it's not necessarily storytelling. It's like we're doing a workshop or presentation, and the sponsor will say, well, what's going to happen? And I go, I don't know. Who's going to be there? I may have an agenda, but when I get there and we start doing this, I'm like, oh, see, this was what I thought was going to happen, but I see really that this is what has to happen now. And I'm going to follow that. I'm not going to be like, I'm sorry, this was the plan. I can say, So that's the favorite part about this is creating community over and over and over again, and also empowering folk who are part of that now community to go out and create community in that way. Yeah, it makes me very happy.
It's about like a chef can tell the customer, I know exactly what you want. Yeah.
Yeah, like, I see that. Yeah, no, girl, I think what you really need is some crab. That's what I think you need. But because you don't always know. And sometimes I am surprised.
Yeah.
I'm surprised. I was recently at Francis Marion University, and I was doing gallery talks. As I say, I'm a visual artist. And so I had a show up. And students came in, and they had engaged with my work. And so, the gallery talk. I did two. The first one went a certain way. The second one, it was a different group. Something felt different. And I went in the direction that felt right in that space. And it was. And a lot of that is, trusting yourself. Trusting yourself. I could be wrong, but being open. So even though I'm up front, it's still a very vulnerable place to be open enough to trust myself. And sometimes it's like, I remember I've been in audiences where somebody might be sitting right there and they are not in it. They don't like it. They don't like anything you are doing. And then you have to be real careful that you're not like right there. But no, really,
Yeah.
And I've had that happen. And I have to go, yeah. But that's something that I've learned over the years. I've been telling stories now for, like I say, 38 years. Yeah. I'm old, and I say that, and I say it partly joking, but partly quite serious. And I have said seriously, joking and serious, first, I want to live to be very old. And what I want to do is to tell stories the whole time. And I half jokingly say, please, creator, not soon. Not soon. I want to be like, we saw Natalie come on out on the stage, and we created a community.
Right.
And then I might, die in the green room. But not any time soon.